All right, hi everyone. My name is Jacob Fisher. I'm an assistant professor in the College of Media at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I'm excited to talk to you today about some work that I've been working on with some collaborators looking at a systematic review and meta-analysis of the accuracy of self-reported media use versus device-logged measures. And so a lot of times in the field, we want to look at media use variables and how these variables might relate to factors involving well-being. And in order to do this, of course, we want to have some sort of gold standard of the amount of media or the types of media people are actually using so that we can develop clear conclusions about how media use relate to well-being. Of course, these data aren't available to us almost always. And so what we do is we can approximate these things using self-reported use measures, which are overwhelmingly the most frequently used measures of media use. And also increasingly, people are using device logs in order to measure media use. And if we can consider these two variables as indexing the same construct, we want to know whether they have any sort of convergent validity with one another to understand whether either of these might be valid ways to measure media use. But currently, the overlap between these two measures is unknown. And self-reported media use, concerningly, there's been growing evidence that it may not actually index real media use. And this is for a lot of reasons, namely that media are embedded throughout our lives. We often use lots of different media concurrently with one another, with media multitasking. And these types of behaviors, it's been shown, are notoriously difficult to report accurately. And even so, the measurement validity of our measures is critical for drawing conclusions about the way that media use relates to well-being, especially because these often drive policy decisions and public opinion, as has been shown in several high-profile cases and government opinions over the last 5 to 10 years. And so the aims of this study, we wanted to investigate the correspondence between self-reported and device-logged media use in the extant literature. And our first goal was to look at the association between self-reported quantity and frequency of media use and equivalent logged measures. And despite known concerns with these measures, we also wanted to investigate the association between quote-unquote problematic media use and device-logged use, as problematic media use is used intermittently as an index of actual media use. And we expected just a small to medium positive correlation for each, given the concerns with self-reported media use that I noted earlier in the literature. And we also finally wanted to investigate the degree of over or under-reporting in self-reports compared to the log data. So for the methods for the study, we conducted some automatic and manual searching in a number of databases using forward and backward search methods. We also conducted some public calls for data that may not have been published, thesis, dissertation data, and we followed the PRISMA guidelines for inclusion or exclusion of studies. And originally we had over 12,000 hits. We narrowed these down to 47 papers that considered self-reported media use and an equivalent logged measure that we were able to compare. And this included 106 effect sizes and with a total N of around 57,000. And we conducted 3 separate meta-analyses and moderator analyses. We looked at the correlation between self-reported and logged media use. We looked at the correlation between self-reported problematic media use and logged media use. And we also looked at the weighted ratio of self-reported to logged media use. And we used some inference criteria to determine whether or not these would be convergently valid with one another using some extant literature. Whereas a correlation of greater than 0.7 indicates strong evidence of convergent validity, correlations between 0.5 and 0.7 indicate acceptable convergent validity, then correlations of below 0.5 indicate that these measures are inadequate to support convergent validity. That if these two measures correlate less than 0.5 with one another, it's pretty questionable that they measure the same thing. And so the first thing that we found is that the correlation between self-reported and logged media use was only about 0.38, with a confidence interval of 0.33 to 0.42. And of course, this was significant given just the large number of studies and the large number of participants included in this literature. And we also showed that the correlation between quote-unquote problematic media use and logged media use was even lower. It was around 0.25, with a confidence interval of 0.2 to 0.29. Again, significant just because of the large number of data points in this study. And we showed that participants were almost never accurate at estimating their media use. Only about 6.1% of the self-reports were within 5% of their logged equivalent. And contrary to what some other studies have shown, we showed the exact same underreporting or overreporting across the different studies, with a ratio of means of 1.2 and a 95% confidence interval from 0.94 to 1.54, and p of 0.129. And so what does this mean? It means that we found a modest correlation between self-reported and logged media use measures. and even weaker correlation for these problematic use self-report scales. And we also show that participants are almost never accurate when it came to estimating how much media they had used within the time periods of the studies. And from this, we can conclude that self-reported media use, whether it's duration, volume, or frequency, all of which we included in our study, are likely not a valid indicator of people's actual media use. And of course, log data aren't ground truth in and of themselves. They're prone to sampling biases of their own, device and OS restrictions, maybe even more importantly, ethical, security, and privacy challenges when it comes to accessing log data. So we're not necessarily arguing for the inherent superiority of log data, pointing out there's the lack of convergent validity between the two and the questionable nature of these self-report measures as a result. And because of this, we should reflect on what we're actually measuring whenever we study media use, whether self-reported media use might relate to something else, whether it comes to pre-existing biases or other factors. And when it comes to media, studying things like the specific affordances of the media, behaviors that people engage in, digital practices, different populations, in order to conduct more thoughtful study of the relationship between media use and well-being, rather than relying on self-report measures alone, which we show to have very low convergent validity. So I'd like to thank all the collaborators on this study. We've included our Twitter handles here, perhaps appropriately, because a good portion of this study was conceived on Twitter. I've also posted a link to the preprint and to the OSF where you can see the data, the pre-registration, and all the other code associated with this study. Thanks, and looking forward to answering your questions.